What up, what up, what up, everybody? This is the Doctor of Football Ultimate Patriots podcast. I am your host, Dr. Dennis Tian. Joining me, as always, the CEO of Hedge Better, Justin Fine. It is New Year's Day. We are recording remote. Hope everyone had a good, safe, fun night last night. Justin, how you doing, my man, today on this cloudy New Year's Day?
Well, you know what? I'm about to turn 31 years old, right? And I can say now in my early 30s, New Year's Day feels a lot different than it did in my early 20s. Like, I'm actually well rested today. I got a good workout in. Like, I'm being productive. It's the times are changing, different. You know?
Wait till you guys have a baby.
Oh my God, I know. But it's just, it's
a real game changer.
It's just funny because I know younger me, 20-something-year-old me, New Year's Day probably would have been a tough day, Yeah. So it's funny. It's funny to see how the times change. But it was good. We hung in, didn't do too much. The wife and I just kind of relaxed and sleep before midnight.
That's the same here. Same here. Big day for college football today, Justin. College football playoffs. What are your thoughts so far on this tournament? These games have been underwhelming so far, haven't they?
They've been super underwhelming. I gotta say the first round that kicked off, which was like 11 days ago. I was actually, by the way, I'm really surprised. I don't know about you, the fact that there was 11 days in between the rounds of the playoffs. I thought that was a little long, but. I watched that first round and, obviously no upsets. All the big teams came through and kind of kicked the crap out of like the smaller schools, right? The kind of lucky to be their schools. And then, heading into last night, the Penn State Boise State game, I said, look, like, I'm not going to get fooled by the Boise State, like Ashton Jeanty hype. Like they play an absolute joke of a schedule compared to Penn State. And I think Penn State's going to trounce them. So I took the spread. I took Penn State minus 11.5. And I'm probably going to do the same thing today with the games across the board.
We really haven't seen one competitive game yet.
No,
every single one of these games has been a one-sided blowout.
Right.
I will say at least last night I took Penn State on the spread as well in a pool that I have, and the spread was in doubt till the end. Yeah, but that's it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I don't think the final score kind of reflected the game too, because I think they wound up winning by like what? It was a good like 16, 20 points, something like that at the end.
Yeah. I think it was 31-14. I want to say.
Okay. 7. Yeah. All right. So yeah, and I know it was a little bit tighter, for most of the game, but I think nevertheless, it just kind of goes to show you, and don't forget, Boise State's the team that had all that rest in that situation. Like, I think it just goes to show you that some of these bigger schools that play the tougher schedules, that have the higher recruits, right? Like, it's just more often than not, the hype isn't going to come to fruition for some of these like Cinderella stories.
Yeah, right? I agree with that. And I'm really concerned about that because,
right.
And I'm wondering if like the rules in college football, hopefully will kind of level the playing field a little bit between like your 5 through 12 and your 1 through 4. But it does seem like that gap is pretty wide right now between like those top, say 5-6 schools and some of these schools that were more on the fringe. And the way the system is set up, it's worth pointing out. Boise State, I think, had the number 4 seed, which doesn't really sound like it makes a lot of sense.
No, it didn't really make much sense to me at the time. And again, like what sealed the deal for me was, and I'd be lying if I said I followed college football, like I've been following the NFL, but I just went and took a look back at Boise State's schedule. And then I looked at Penn State's schedule and I said, look, we're comparing apples and oranges here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one quick thing I want to ask you before we get to the Pats, Justin, and that is, what about Ashton Jeanty's draft stock after last night? Because he kind of had a tough game, and I think, really, first of all, he fumbled a couple times, and my son made the joke that he's running like Ramondre Stevenson after he fumbled 2 times, which I thought was kind of funny because he's 7. Yeah. And but I thought, look, Jeanty was a Heisman runner-up who had literally devoured bad competition for the whole year. And when he really faced a top program and a kind of a real Division I opponent, you saw that maybe he wasn't quite the top prospect that I think a lot of people hope he is.
Totally, totally. And look, I don't want to take away from Ashton Genty. Like, I still think he's a very talented player, right? I think
Yeah.
he'll probably be a successful NFL running back. And I think without doubt, he's going to be the first running back off the board in the draft. But it's like, I think it brought him back down to earth a little bit, because all we hear is, comparing his stats to the likes of like the Derrick Henrys and, the all-time great kind of college running backs, the last like however many Heisman winners, all that stuff.
Barry Sanders.
Right, exactly. And it's like, look, I get it. The kid's been putting up numbers, but those numbers are a little bit inflated because he's not rushing against SEC defenders that are going to be playing on Sunday next year, right? So it's like you gotta take that into consideration. I still think the kid's a good running back. I don't want to take that away from him, but I think he was brought back down to earth last night.
He definitely was a little bit brought back down to earth. I still think he's. I want to say he is a second round pick right now. I don't think anyone will take him in the first round, especially after last night. But I think I see him more as like a second to third round pick. And I don't know enough about the draft class to say whether he'll be the first running back off the board or not. I guess that's something I'm going to have to do some homework on. But I definitely would say that when you look at like when teams take running backs in the first round, they really have to be exceptional players right now.
Right.
I'm looking at like Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, some of these names that have gone off in the last couple of years, in the first round. And I definitely don't think Ashton Genty is in that category, in spite of an amazingly productive college career.
I agree. And look, I think, looking back on it, if you can snag him in the second or third round, it might actually be a great value pick, where you can get him. And I think there's a couple teams that could definitely use a guy like that on a rookie contract. So
including one in Foxborough, frankly, because he would be a great fit here. I really believe that. They certainly need a young running back on this team.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the Patriots, Justin, because and to use a holiday analogy, the Patriots are the gift that keeps on giving for storylines. If you're someone covering or talking about or just thinking about this team, it never ends. Like this team has become like a reality show over the last few years, and they continue to produce. I'm going to kick it off with my opening take. I got a lot to say about Mayo and the situation going on. So let's just get right to it. This is the question, Justin, that Robert and Jonathan Kraft need to ask themselves, and I think really all Patriots fans need to be asking themselves right now, which is, do you want to put a Band-Aid on this situation, this mess?
Yeah.
Or do you want to fix this mess? Because when you talk to people or you listen to the radio or you listen to television, and you hear people twisting themselves into pretzels with different things they're going to do so that Jerod Mayo can stay and be the coach here. We're going to fire this guy. We're going to bring in this coordinator. We're going to hire this head personnel guy. And, people are going into gymnastics to try to find ways so that Jerod Mayo gets to be the coach here next year in a way that makes it work and gives us hope. And if you take a step back, and you look at the 10,000-foot view of that, I think you have to ask yourself, why? Why do you have to do that? It's happened like 20 times in the last 15 years that a head coach has been fired after 1 year when it's an obvious mistake. This is not something that has never happened before. So why do we have to twist ourselves into pretzels? Why do the Crafts have to twist themselves into pretzel to find an arrangement that works for Jerod Mayo, especially when you have other good coaching candidates out there? I think, Justin, the last 2 or 3 weeks, the silence from Robert and Jonathan Kraft on this issue is incriminating, because the Crafts could end this in 1 second, leaking a story to Schefter or Rappaport and saying to the world, Jerod Mayo is our guy for 2025. That has not happened yet. Every leak from like a month ago, there were a few, they all came with the qualifier. Is this a disaster or not, right? Nothing since then. The silence is deafening from the Crafts, Justin. I think that it has been so clear from day one that Jerod Mayo is not fit or qualified for this job right now. I think the Crafts have come begrudgingly to realize that. Robert, maybe begrudgingly. I think Jonathan is more aware of that. And I'm going to call this right now, and this is a hot take, but I really believe this. Jerod Mayo will be fired on Monday or Tuesday of next week, and he is coaching his last game as the New England Patriots coach this week.
Wow. All right. I mean, okay. So let me start by saying this. I would not be panicking or view this as like a big travesty if we had to move on from Jerod Mayo. I know a lot of people, and myself included, have said like, after everything the organization's gone through over the last 5 years, you bring in Jerod Mayo. If you had to get rid of him after the first year and start again from scratch, like that would just be so deflating and morally defeating. The more I think about it, the more I say, who cares? If you can get a competent guy to come in and replace him, somebody that we have confidence in, I'm all for it. I mean, Jerod Mayo hasn't done anything to win me over, to show me that he deserves the second year, or to give me confidence that things will change. His play, the one thing I will say in his defense is that his players still seem to have his back, right? When asked about it by the media, which...
Do you really think that though? Like, I mean, how many, yes, some, but how many guys have fired off? Keon White, Devon Godchow, KJ Osborne, who's not here anymore. Like, he's had more players, I think, challenge him than probably any other coach in the NFL this year.
I mean, look, as of right now, though, can you point to anybody that's come out and directly talked, about Jerod Mayo? And I think we can look at some of those one and dones, like the Urban Meyers, like some of those guys, and say that, the smoke signal was probably a little bit higher for some of those other guys coming from the locker room, right? Like there was some other, there were some issues that were a little bit more public in terms of, the locker room's discontent for their head coach. Not saying that's not
Urban Meyer, didn't he literally kick the kicker?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he kicked.
I mean, that's
while
sort
he was
of
stretching.
abnormal, but
yeah,
I guarantee you, if you look at, say, the last 10 coaches that were fired one and done, or even just the last 10 coaches that were fired in the NFL, I guarantee you that Mayo has had as many, if not more, people questioning him in the media. No one has outright directly said Jerod Mayo's a bad coach, but there have certainly been players that have said things that imply that things aren't going that well in that locker room. And I think that in of itself is abnormal and telling.
Let me ask you this, and not to kind of pivot, but is there a world where Jerod Mayo is removed from the head coaching role but stays with the team? Like, we've talked about wanting to get rid of like a DeMarcus Covington. They've taught, you hear rumors about bringing like a Josh McDaniels back in, getting rid of what's his name over there, Van Pelt. I mean, if you were to bring somebody in like a Vrabel, let's just speak best case scenarios. You get like a Ben Johnson, you get a Mike Vrabel, you get somebody who you'd love to have as your head coach, right? Does Jerod Mayo become your defensive coordinator? Is there a world where that happens?
I say, well, as a defensive coordinator, do you even want Jerod Mayo as your defensive coordinator based on what you've seen this year? I think Mayo's best role for an organization is either going to be as a linebackers coach or in some kind of like player development role where he's building culture and being sort of a bridge between the locker room and the front office. I think that's his skill set. And he's probably very qualified to be a linebacker coach. What you've seen from this defense this year, I mean, we're going to make Covington the fall guy. And Jerod Mayo, what did he do to fix this defense? He's supposed to be a defensive coach. And on every metric, right, they've gone from a respectable defense to one of the worst defenses in the league. So I don't even want Jerod Mayo back as a defensive coordinator. Maybe in some front office role, it's possible, but I don't think that's probably the best of ideas either. I mean, anything is possible, Justin, but I don't think that's very likely or desirable.
Yeah, I guess I just, the reason I say that is because I wonder if, you move on from him completely, if there's a world where he stays within the organization. But I feel like he's shown that, like, he has this ego, this hubris, this side of him that I don't see Jerod Mayo stepping back into a linebackers coach role. Like I see him wanting something bigger and better than that. So I'm just curious, like, if you have to break from him, because for a while, don't forget, like for a while we talked about this guy. Oh, we get this great young guy, Jerod Mayo on defense. Like, when we talked about him, like he had all this potential to kind of climb the ranks. Do we try to keep him and see if there's still potential, just not at the head coaching job. I don't know. I'm just, I'm just
it's a
kind of
good
thinking
idea,
out loud.
Justin, but I think, like you said, the egos and the human side of things is going to get in the way of that.
Right.
What Jerod Mayo really needs is he needs to go be a head coach at like a college program. Jerod Mayo needs like a UNC, right? Or like like a Colorado with Prime or Tulane or something like that where, what job did Michael Vick just get? Did he take a job somewhere in Virginia, I think a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
Mayo needs something like that. He needs to go be a head coach in college where he can kind of learn. There's less scrutiny. He can gain some of the acumen he needs and then go move on at some point up the ladder and rebuild his career. That's going to be the right thing for him. What I want to ask you, Justin, is if you do bring Mayo back, right? What does it look like next year? I mean, really think this out. Like this guy will come into 2025 with like an axe hanging over his head. Like his hot seat, he's going to be on the hottest hot seat of any coach in this league that has had in recent memory. And who's he going to get to be his coordinators under those circumstances? What's going to happen when things go wrong next year? It's just going to spiral out of control. If they do bring Mayo back, I think he'll be gone by week 10 or 11 anyways next year. And I don't think it makes sense to bring a guy back when he's that close to being fired.
Well, I will say if you bring him back next year, right? I think this Patriots team, I'm optimistic that this could be a markedly different team next year, record wise, in performance wise. I look at Drake May potentially taking another step in development. I look at what you can potentially do now that you have this a number one overall pick, right? I don't think they'll use it. I think they'll obviously trade it away, but the capital, the assets that you can stock, you get the most room and you get the biggest budget in terms of free agency to go out there and be able to sign people. I see this team just being a lot different in 2025. I could see them potentially, making a push for the playoffs, being competitive.
I don't disagree with that, but this is what I would say to you. Let's play this scenario out. Okay. They spend $130 million in free agency. They rebuild the offensive line. They have a good draft and they bring in some pieces that they need through other areas, free agency, whatever, other ways. Who do you feel better about having the keys to the Lamborghini at that point? Jerod Mayo or Mike Vrabel? Brian Flores or Jerod Mayo?
Agreed.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you can do all those things. And then you're going to still have a huge question around, okay, we rebuilt our offensive line. We brought in some big time receivers. We brought in a couple guys in the draft we really love, but you're going to have a huge question mark about whether Jerod Mayo has the aptitude, the acumen, the ability at this point in his coaching career to put it all together. If you're going to make that kind of investment in rebuilding this team and you're the Crafts, don't you feel 1,000% better about that if it's with a proven, experienced head coach? Because what I would say, I look at Vrabel and Flores as very similar guys. I think they're both terrific coaches that had good runs in their first jobs without a quarterback. And we have a quarterback in New England, I believe. So I think if you give either of those two coaches a quarterback and the tools they need, they would be a very good team next year. If you go to next year with Mayo, I still think you have a ton of questions around the whole thing, regardless of how you rebuild this roster.
So I 100% agree with you that you're in a better spot in, as an organization, you'd feel better about it if you had one of those guys. To play devil's advocate, though, I think that's the exact same pitch, though, that all the reasons we just named, it's the exact same pitch that Jerod Mayo is going to make to the Crafts, which is, hey, let's see what I can do after we have all this draft capital, after Drake May takes that next step, after we go out and spend all this money in free agency. Give me a chance to see what I can do with the revamped roster. I think that's going to be the pitch that he makes to the Crafts.
Yeah, agreed. But this is where it gets back to, I think, the core question, which is what has Jerod Mayo done in these 17 games to make, or 16 games, one more left, to make the Crafts or anyone else think that he deserves that opportunity. Because in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of most fans and most media and most people that watch this team, this has been a disaster. Like, I don't think this has just been a losing year. I think all of us expected a losing year, including the Crafts, a losing year this year. This has been a debacle on the field and off the field, and it has been regression. Okay. And I think that when you look at that, you really have to look at what has Mayo done in this season to deserve that opportunity. Because in my book, from my perspective, and you might disagree with this, Justin, it really has been that bad from him this year.
I don't disagree with anything you're saying. I'm trying to play this out, and I'm looking at the relationship that, we're made to believe that Robert Kraft and Jerod Mayo have, right?
Yep.
And
that's what scares us all, right?
And that's what scares me, because I can see the emotional appeal to Robert Kraft of Jerod Mayo saying, "Hey, like I was working with makeshift parts this year. Let me spend the money. Let me use the draft capital. Let me develop Drake. Give me a chance to prove to you that I can do this." Like, that's what scares me, is that I think that relationship and that argument could carry weight with Robert Kraft. In spite of everything you're saying, which is 100% true, we'd be better off with somebody else, and Jerod Mayo hasn't shown us anything this year to think that he deserves that opportunity. I just see that personal relationship coupled with that argument carrying and playing with Robert Kraft.
I agree with that, Justin, but I think that it has gotten that bad that I can't believe a savvy, brilliant businessman like Robert Kraft at this point cannot see the writing on the wall. And I'll go back to my original point, which is there's been no endorsement of Mayo over the last few weeks, even though his seat has gotten like white hot the last few weeks. Even the debacle, I mean, we haven't even mentioned the game on Saturday yet, right? Because that was an absolute debacle against the Chargers. I would say that was probably the seventh time of 16 games this year where this team really quit, or at least wasn't fully engaged for a large stretch of the game. And the Patriots were completely and totally outclassed by a mediocre team for really the third, or I would say the fourth time in the last 5 weeks, because Miami, Arizona, Indianapolis to a certain extent, and now the Chargers, and mixed in there was like one good half of football against the Bills where you caught them off guard and then completely fell apart, by the way, and lost the game in the second half. So when Kraft always put that qualifier in about his support for Mayo, and it was always unless it's a total disaster. I mean, I feel like a businessman like Robert Kraft has to see at this point that this has traipsed into disaster territory, especially after that game on Saturday, because I'm sorry, that was ugly.
Yeah, it was. And you know what? I hope you're right. And I think we'll see in about a week or so, I guess. But I just, at this point, I think the writing's on the wall. I think we know everything we need to know. I think we've seen everything we need to see. I don't think this last game of the year is going to mean anything in any way. And you know what? I think at this point, it's up for the people who make decisions to make the decision.
That's exactly right. I mean, you just said something huge, which is what can happen on Sunday that's going to change anything about the narrative of this team? And the answer is nothing.
Right. Absolutely nothing. Especially the fact that the Bills are rolling out pretty much their B squad. I think Mitch Trubisky is starting for them.
No, Allen's going to start, and then Trubisky's coming in the second, like early. They want to keep Josh Allen's consecutive start streak alive. I guess so. Allen will start, but he'll be gone early.
Yeah. Okay. So you know what? I mean, that right then and there tells me that, hey, the Bills are already looking past this week, regardless of it. It's like only bad can come from the Patriots this weekend, because nothing that happens,
right.
I'll be able to give them any credit.
You're
for
right.
It,
You're so right. Only bad. That's so spot on. Like, only bad can come. Mayo is, the die has been cast. Like, it can only get worse, and it might get worse if they lose to a bunch of backups, or things get ugly, or they continue to make mistakes, like they've been making, and it could be ugly. It's really sad, Justin, and we talked a lot on previous episodes and in previous years about Belichick's legacy and Brady's legacy. We haven't talked as much about Kraft's legacy, but I think it kind of comes up with this conversation, and that is like, for people of my generation, I don't know if you quite realize your age group quite realizes, but for people of my generation, let's not forget Robert Kraft is the man that saved football in New England. If it's not for Robert Kraft, the Patriots are playing in St. Louis probably right now. They're the St. Louis Stallions. So Kraft went from like legend and like godfather of football in this market to like absolute crashing into the toilet bowl in like the span of 3 or 4 years. Robert Kraft is still, in my opinion, a terrific owner. And I think he still deserves a lot of credit for his legacy of saving football in New England and what he did over the last 30 years. And I think people need to remember that. But if I'm Kraft, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, I was wrong about Jerod Mayo. I think Kraft needs to get up at that press conference next week, after they announce they're moving on from Mayo, and just say to the world, hey, I thought this was the right move. I made a mistake. We're moving on. And I think fans will be accepting and forgiving of that.
Yeah, I think they would be too. I totally agree. I think that's actually would be refreshing. And I think that's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear excuses. They just want to hear ownership and accountability.
Yeah. Totally accountability from the ownership.
Yeah.
Because all the things, Justin, that were external to winning, and I just want to point this out one more time, right? What were the things we were looking for? Because a lot of people I know, they make excuses for Jerod Mayo and they say, well, the roster stinks. Well, independent of the roster, right?
Yeah.
How's the leadership been? How's the culture been? It's been a disaster, right?
Yeah.
How's the player development? Is it all Jalen Polk's fault that he sucks? Is it all Layden Robinson and Caden Wallace's fault that they haven't? I mean, when you swing and miss on every draft pick, maybe you drafted really poorly, but maybe the coaching isn't that great and the player development isn't that great. Like, who's getting better on this team besides Drake May, who's a stud? So you look at all those metrics, and it's like all the things we hope to see, even with a losing season, have not been there.
I agree totally. And, one thing, though, I do want to say, and I think it's interesting. Did you see Urban Meyer's comments? I forget whose show he was on, but he was talking about the best football locker room he's ever seen, and it was Bill Belichick's locker room, back in the 2000s, when they had Brady and Brewski and Seymour and all those guys. And he said that was the best locker room he's ever seen. And he said one of the reasons why it was the best locker room he'd ever seen was because they had guys in that locker room that basically kept everything in check, kept everything running smoothly to the point where none of that shit ever got to Bill, right? And one thing I wonder with this Patriots team is, yes, they need leaders in the right positions as coaches and as GMs to help, get these guys where they need to be. But, I also wonder, are they really just struggling from a lack of player? What's the word I'm looking for? Like, just veteran leadership, just veteran mentality, like guys who can come in and help set that locker room straight and help make the coach's job a little bit easier. I think that's something that we're not really talking about as much. And I do think it is something to, at least point out that, hey, this team is lacking the accountability and the coaching, not only from the coaches, but from the players themselves.
Yes, but I think that in of itself also speaks to a failure of Jerod Mayo, because part of what he was supposed to be doing this year was building a culture.
Right.
And clearly you're right. There is a lack of veteran leadership on this team. And that is, I think, a failing you have to put on Jerod Mayo, because, hey, you could be 5-12 this year, but you could have built a culture that is the kind of culture you want taking you into the next season, 2025. And in fact, they've done the complete opposite. It's a total mess in there. And let's not forget, Justin, they spent a ton of Robert Kraft's money this offseason re-signing veterans. And we said at the time that that's going to really help in this locker room and build culture in this locker room. And you know what? That didn't happen.
Yeah. No, fair point. For sure.
Do you want to talk at all about the actual game from Saturday? Do you have any thoughts or observations on the game? It really was kind of there's not a lot to say. It was the Chargers looked like a professional, well-run operation, and the Patriots looked like a clown show.
Yeah, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it all up perfectly, if we're being honest.
Right.
I don't think there's really much to say, if we're being honest, you know?
I'll say two things. See what you think about this. Number one is, okay, for years the Patriots have been like the thorn in Justin Herbert's side. And where is that defensive expertise and acumen
Yeah.
now that Bill Belichick is gone? Right? If
It
Mayo's the
is, right.
defensive guy, what happened where you've always been able to stop Herbert and he literally owned them on Saturday?
Yeah, exactly. I noticed that too. It's the change in Herbert's, you know, ability to kind of come in here and for lack of a better term, just mess us up. Is something we haven't seen out of him in the Chargers in the past. So I think that was very telling for sure.
I think it's very telling. And then let's talk a little about Drake May's performance on Saturday, Justin, because I'm going to say this right off the bat. Like, when I say Drake May didn't have a chance on Saturday, I mean that like literally. Like, he literally didn't have a chance. You look at the first half of that game, and he was on the field for 12 snaps because they couldn't get the Chargers off the field. He missed 3 when he was getting evaluated for the concussion. The Patriots only ran 15 plays in the first half of that game. Yeah. By the time May actually got the ball, short of one lucky play, a touchdown pass to Pop Douglas at the end of the half, but by the time May actually got a chance in that game to actually have the ball, the Patriots were already down 3 scores in the second half.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what do you expect at that point? I mean, you know, you go back to the game management, the defense, the play calling, all that stuff. I mean, it's just there's a ton that's getting in the way of Drake's May ability to develop.
The defense is a huge problem because you can't get the ball back. I mean, I think right now the defense is a bigger problem on this team than the offense going into next year. They cannot stop anyone.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I wonder, you know what? Again, it goes back to the coaching. It goes back to the leadership because this defense is definitely playing worse than their talent level. I know that they've had their ups and downs, but they're not as bad as they're performing.
And I thought the pass protection for May was as bad as it had been since the beginning, which I think is another alarming sign. I mean, they've kind of gone up and down on the offensive line. They've never been good. There have been times they maybe weren't as bad as we feared, but I thought that May was under as much pressure on Saturday as he had been at any point this year. I mean, he literally, when he did get the ball, I mean, he did not have time to throw. You're talking like a second, if that. I thought May did a terrific job, frankly, of handling what was just constant duress on Saturday.
Yeah, I saw a stat, and other than Owenau, I'm pretty sure all his other starting linemen ranked as either the bottom graded or the second to last bottom graded at their position according to PFF. And then even Owenau was like 18th out of like 32, something like that. So I mean, May has been working with absolute dog crap on the line this year, and it really is, you know, getting bad.
It was, and whatever it was about the Chargers team, whether it was Bosa or whatever, I mean, they just, I mean, they were on May all day long. He really didn't have any time to throw the ball, and I thought that really affected his ability to really do anything. And like, you know, look, it was kind of a blah performance from May, but I really can't blame him for that because he was given, he barely had the ball. And he was given nothing to work with when he did. I think the Chargers had the ball for like 41 minutes. It's like, you know, it's like, what can the quarterback do when he's not on the field?
Exactly. Yeah. You really literally can't do anything at that point.
What about the Chargers, Justin? What do you think about that team now that we've had kind of a up close look at that team? I do think you talk about the impact of coaching and how a good coach can make a team that was historically known for being, you know, sloppy and poorly prepared and made a lot of bad choices. And just the quarterback looks like a different player right now with Harbaugh. And it's just like, if you want to look at a franchise that represents how important coaching is in the NFL, the Chargers are really a great example of that, because that team is, if nothing else, they look like a professional team.
They do. Obviously, I think one of the biggest turnarounds in the NFL this year, I think, is the Chargers franchise. And you got to really give that credit to Harbaugh. But I don't take them seriously. I mean, as far as being a contender, I don't think I can't picture them winning the AFC. I can't picture them winning the Super Bowl. I think they're probably a one and done team, honestly. I mean, I think the only way they get out of the first round of the playoffs is maybe if they like go into Houston or something like that. Like that.
Isn't that where they would be going potentially? No.
I don't know. It's probably right around there. I mean, just the way I think
Yeah.
Houston is 4 in there. I think like 6 or 7, something like that. So I mean, I think that's a potential matchup. That's really the only matchup I can see them going in and winning, though. I think they go into Buffalo. I think they get smoked. I think if they went to Baltimore, they get smoked. I don't know.
Do you think they could go into Kansas City and win?
No. Honestly, the Chiefs have been the Achilles heel for this Chargers team since Justin Herbert has entered the league. I mean, he has just never been able to perform against them. I can't see.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go out on a limb on this one too. I think that Chargers team is a dangerous team for the Chiefs, and I think that if they get through the first round of the playoffs, which I think will be the challenge for them, I could 100% see that Chargers team beating the Patrick Mahomes-led Chief, even in Arrowhead. The Chargers are familiar with playing in Kansas City. They're not going to be intimidated by that. I think Harbaugh has brought a certain air of professionalism and preparedness to that team that they have never had before. I agree with you. I see no way that they get out of the AFC or get to the Super Bowl, but I do think that it is very possible that they could go into Kansas City and win if they can get there.
All right. Well, I mean, we'll see. They definitely, it's going to be interesting to see where things settle, where they get that first round matchup and to kind of watch them. Because again, my knock on Herbert has always been, he's not a big time player. Like he's not clutch. Like I've been very close to calling him a talented loser, right? Like he's been knocking at that door for me.
No, he's been in the club. He's one of the talented losers, I thought.
So yes, but I've always put the caveat on him that like I'd like to see him with like a real coach. I mean, even he had Brandon Staley, and I always put the caveat that I think he's a talented loser, but I want to give him the chance with a real coach with some real weapons. And I think this is a great and a real defense too. He hasn't really had a real defense to work with. So this is kind of the year everything's come together for him. If he goes into the playoffs and lays a complete egg, yeah, it's a talented loser.
He's certainly come up short where he's had opportunities in the past in the postseason in big games. I mean, I feel like the classic story of like the Chiefs Chargers game is like, and I feel like I've seen this like 6 times now, is like the Chargers come in, get a lead, play a really good game, and then somehow find a way to lose the game anyways. Yep. Because like I feel like we've seen that a lot. Like it just feels like they can't get over that mountain. But I think this year with Harbaugh, that I feel like that's going to be their best chance. I really do.
Love it. Yeah. And look, I think that'd be a great upset to see them, beat whoever. So yeah.
And don't discount, Justin, the importance of J.K. Dobbins coming back, because I think he ran the ball really well on Saturday, and he does give them another tool in the toolbox, if you will. And for me, for that Chargers team, it's kind of all about not asking Justin Herbert to do everything. Exactly. And I think between that defense and now you have Dobbins, that's in Harbaugh's coaching, I think that's what they have.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure.
All right. Any other thoughts about the Pats, Justin? This game coming up against the Bills, I guess we're going to see what happens. It sounds like you don't agree with me, that you still think Mayo is going to be back.
Look, me thinking he's going to be back is just, I don't know. It's just my gut feeling. I don't want him back. I don't think he deserves to be back, but something tells me he's going to be back. Something tells me Robert Kraft is going to give him next year, to at least part of next year, to try to prove his case with the revamped roster. Not saying he should get it, but I think that's what's going to happen. I don't know.
I'm telling you right now, the silence from the Crafts is deafening. I'll say it again. He will be fired next week, early next week. Right. And they will make a play for Mike Vrabel. There's already been a little bit of reporting from Diana Rossini. Vrabel wants to come here. I don't think that's by accident. I think it's going to happen swift and fast. And by the way, I don't think Mike Vrabel is like Amos Alonzo Stagg. I mean, I don't think he's like this. I think he's a good coach. Yes. That I think if you give him, if I'm Vrabel, I would love to come to New England, right? Because you've got Drake May in place, you've got $130 million in cap room, and you're going to have the number 1 pick in the draft. Like this is an appealing job in a subtle way. I know it feels like a mess, and it is a mess, but I think to a coach like Vrabel or Flores or someone like that, there are building blocks that this franchise has that other teams that are really bad don't have. And I'm talking like, look at Jacksonville, and they're saddled with Trevor Lawrence, right? The Giants don't have a quarterback. The Jets aren't going to have a top 5 pick, and they don't have a quarterback, and they're a mess. Like, you could go down the list of all these teams. The Raiders are going to, all of them. And really look, in this job, this New England situation, it does have appeal, I think, more than people realize, because of Drake May and because of the draft assets and the cap room they have.
That's exactly it. I mean, look, I think the cherry on top for this team was sliding their way into that number 1 pick like that. I don't think you can underestimate how attractive it is to say you have the number 1 pick and a franchise quarterback. It gives you so many options in terms of what you can do with that. You have what you think is a franchise quarterback. You have the number 1 overall pick, and you have the most money to play with, right? Like,
yep.
I mean,
yeah, it's a good situation. I think Vrabel wants to be here, really do, and I can see why.
Exactly,
and it's a good ownership. Like yeah, the Crafts have made some mistakes the last few years. I mean, look at the totality of their 30 years. These are good owners. This is a great market. This is a big media market. It's a great place to live and raise a family. This is passionate fans. This is a relevant franchise. This is a good place for a coach to be. You could come in here where expectations now are rock bottom after what happened the last 2 years, right? And fix this mess. A coach could come in here and go 8-9 or 9-8 next year, and teams are going to worship the ground that coach walks on after what this franchise has done the last couple seasons.
Totally. So yeah, I think, you know what, you bring in Vrabel, you bring in like McDaniels, you work that number 1 pick into something, you go out, you sign some big free agents, like you get some of those guys back, like Juwan Bentley and Barmore, and who knows, man, you could have a completely different looking organization next year. And I'm excited.
I agree. It could be very different. And I'll say one more thing, if they do end up with the number 1 pick, they obviously have to trade that and bring in, like, because they still have quite a few holes, and the Patriots are lucky if whoever gets the number 1 pick this year is lucky, and I'm going to tell you why, because I think Shedeur Sanders is a real deal, and I think he's going to be coveted, a la Bryce Young was, right, a la Trevor Lawrence was, and you're going to be able to, I think, trade that number 1 pick to someone and really get a haul this year, because not every year the number 1 pick is as good as other years. Like, think of the year the Chiefs took like Eric Fisher. There was a year the Texans took like Mario Williams. Right. This is a year with Shedeur Sanders where I think this pick will have value. Yeah,
totally agree. So yeah, you just gotta trade the video, and part of that too is hoping that Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward keep that buzz around them, for the next couple of months, because the more hype around them, the more valuable that pick becomes.
Yeah, I think Shedeur Sanders in the Giants feels like a match made in heaven, personally. The New York market, and a superstar with a pedigree like that on a quarterback desperate franchise, and they have Malik Neighbors in place already. I'm hoping somehow he ends up in New York, but that would be a great franchise to trade with. Yeah,
absolutely. So, well, we'll see. I think I think you're definitely going to have some bidders that are going to be willing to move up and pay you a haul for that and take advantage of it. I think we're all in agreement that we don't need to use this number 1 pick. I think everyone in New England can at least agree on one thing.
I think that is what I think most of us would say, for sure. Yeah. All right, Justin, let's move to around the league. I want to start with the most recent game that's happened in the NFL, and that is the Monday night game between the Lions and the 49ers. And it was a game that didn't really have playoff implications because the Niners have kind of fallen off the map for them. Anyways, it did have implications for the Lions. But I did think there was a couple worthy discussion points in the Niners line. First of all if you're the 49ers, what are you going to do with Brock Purdy? Like this guy is like a solid B-, C+ kind of player. And don't scoff at that, because you could have an F and things could fall apart. But that said, you watch that game on Monday night. He threw 2 terrible interceptions that I thought really changed the game. He's been decidedly above average this year without the onslaught of weapons around him, right? They've been ravaged by injuries, and you've seen it really affect Purdy. He is better than the last pick in the draft. He's not a bad quarterback. He's an okay quarterback, but I think it's pretty clear where he's landing. Are you going to pay that guy $70 million, $60 million if you're the Niners?
I don't think you should. And you know what? Obviously, I've been a Purdy fan since day one, and I've been rooting for him.
Since the draft.
Since the draft, I was hoping he had that success and took those next steps after his rookie year. I think he's proving that he is like the quintessential like average starting quarterback in the NFL. Like he's talented, but I think he's got a clear ceiling. Like he's a system quarterback, I feel like, to an extent. He's a good game manager. Like he's not gonna, but I don't know. I don't think he's got what you need to go out and commit that type of capital to him. I feel like I don't want to insult him. I mean, but I feel like he's getting into like that Kirk Cousins category of quarterback.
I think that's kind of a great analogy, actually, Kirk Cousins. Yeah. And you know, like Cousins is good enough for a team to be good, but never really wins anything because he's just not quite good enough. And I think, you know, that's kind of what I think Purdy is. And that doesn't mean he's a bad player, but it just means it's a really tough call for the 49ers.
Exactly. I think, look, I mean, you went to 2 Super Bowls with the freaking kid. You know, he's clearly good enough that if you put the team and the coaching around him, you know, he can help get you to where you need to be. But by the same token, he didn't win either of them. And now, you know, when the kind of going gets tough, he's showing that he kind of, I think, has a ceiling or a cap as far as like how much he's able to elevate the team. So I think, look, it's a big roll of the dice. Because you're basically saying we need everything to be perfect, plus not run into Mahomes in the Super Bowl to give us a chance to win a championship. Like that's really what it is.
You know, the other side of the coin is you could do so much worse than Brock Purdy. You could do
totally
so
could.
Worse.
You totally could.
They're really in between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah, totally.
Other side of the ball, you know, I walk away from that game and I'm really not sure if I'm more just amazed at the offensive firepower of that Lions team or aghast at how decimated that Lions defense has gotten. And I really, even though they won the game, obviously, I kind of walk away from Monday night saying, look, we're all rooting for the Lions, but I just think maybe they've had a few too many injuries, and especially injuries on that defense, to survive the postseason.
It's really what worries me about the Lions is I feel like, you know, they're obviously tough. They're finding ways to win games. I mean, let's not forget they're still, what is it, 14-2, whatever it is. Are they 1 loss or are they 2 losses?
They're 1 loss. Yeah, they're 15-1.
No, 2 because they lost the Bills.
Oh, that's right. They're 14-2.
So, okay, so 14-2.
Same as the Vikings.
Yes, exactly. Same as the Vikings, 14-2. I mean, like, they're finding ways to win games. They're obviously a tough, resilient team. They're obviously talented, but I just worry that they peaked too early in the season. Some of these injuries are going to catch up to them, and they're just not going to be at their best. I think they're a little bit more vulnerable than people are thinking right now. I still think that they're one of the top teams in the NFC, and arguably, you know, up there, deservedly so, as the favorites to make it out of the NFC. I just think they're more vulnerable right now, specifically at this point in time, than I've seen them in the last couple months.
Yeah, that's exactly right. They're vulnerable. They peaked too soon. And you know, when you say that, I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that. But to me, that's more about injuries than the way the team is playing. Because I still look at, like, they're a tight, crisp operation. They play hard, and I love the way they play the game. And you talk about culture building.
Yeah.
And Dan Campbell literally can write a textbook on how to build a culture in an NFL franchise, because that guy is taking the biggest loser franchise in the history of professional sports, and he has, in like 3 years, built the most cutting edge, cutthroat, aggressive, go for it, winning culture that we've seen in this league maybe in a long time. So, you know, it's not about a team that kind of hit their stride or too early, as much as it's about a team that just has been, I think, through the war of attrition, has just been decimated and really physically can't keep up on defense.
I agree that they've definitely been decimated a little bit. And the other thing I'll say too is that, you know what, and we've seen it with the Lions in individual games, you know, this year, last year, et cetera, like their aggression comes with an element of risk to it, right? And sometimes that risk doesn't pay off. I mean, they're good enough that more often than not, they're able to execute, you know, their trick plays work, their gambles work, they're going for it on fourth down. It typically works out for them. But we've seen too in situations where it doesn't, and it comes back and kind of bites them. And when you are, you know, you've been decimated by injuries, you're not necessarily at your best, you don't have any wiggle room for error, you know, one of those aggressive play calls or aggressive decisions backfiring on you at the wrong time can be the difference between, you know, winning the Super Bowl and hanging your head in defeat. So I think this team is, to me, they're like the equivalent of like an NBA team that lives and dies by the three, right? It's like if they're on, and it's going to be tough to beat them, but they can very easily have a cold night or you know, or just game plan themselves into a loss, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And people have short memories, Justin, because let's not forget that is exactly what you just said is exactly what happened in the NFC Championship game last year, where they got a huge lead in that game because they took chances and those chances paid off. Yep. And then in the second half of that game, they took chances and they got burned by them.
Yep.
And they lost that game. They should have been in the Super Bowl last year. And I think you've seen there was a run in like October or November where every gamble that Dan Campbell took kind of paid off and worked out.
Yep.
And I think you've seen a little bit of a regression to the mean the last couple of weeks where some of these fourth down calls have really burned him a couple times. And, you know, and I'm thinking the onside kick against Buffalo, right? Great example. 10 minutes left in the game. You're down one score. You got all your timeouts. You don't need to onside kick there. You know, you do that. And I thought that really probably cost them the game. So you're right, because, you know, at some point, you do have to question all the gambling. And if they've gone a little too far with the aggressive gamble, risk taking.
Exactly. And you know what? In the playoffs, the teams get better, the stakes get higher. And it's like, you know what? One of those mistakes that backfire can literally be something that you can't recover from. So
now I will say that if you're going into the year, the playoffs, and your defense is this bad or is this decimated by injury, then maybe you do have to take some big gambles to kind of make up for that and hope that it works out. I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think game script will maybe decide some of that, right? I mean, how aggressive do they need to be, right? You know, so we'll see. But I think Dan Campbell has shown that, you know, he's not changing. The Tiger doesn't change his stripes. Like that's who they are. That's their identity. And they're not going to second guess themselves. They're going to live and die by it. So again, that mentality is fun as it is and exciting as it is to root for. It comes with risks.
It does. But just as fans, don't we want to see that like go for it mentality
I love it.
Win out in the end? Like, wouldn't that be great if, you know, the guy that just goes for it and takes those chances that emotionally as fans, we always want generally coaches to take.
Yeah.
Don't you want to see that guy win?
Totally. Yeah.
Me too. 100%. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the Sunday night game between Penix and Jaden Daniels. What a terrific game, Justin. You know, I walk away from that game and I'm looking at the way Michael Penix played in that game. And I thought he generally played a really good football game. And it did just make me, you know, really, first of all, question what they're doing wrong in New England. The fact that we can't get that kind of consistency and performance from our offense and our quarterback, who I think is just as good. But really made me, I was kind of impressed by Michael Penix from what I saw on Sunday night. He went toe to toe with Daniels.
He did. He looked really good. I mean, he looked like the moment wasn't too big for him. He looked like he belonged to be there. And I mean, look, the kid, you know, one of the knocks on the kid coming out of the draft was that he was like 24 years old, right? He was an older quarterback, older player coming into the league. That should also be one of the benefits of having a quote unquote 24-year-old rookie that's played as much as he had, is that he's got experience. He can come in and have poise and he can step up and be ready to compete. And that's what he did. So I think Atlanta has to be breathing a big sigh of relief that that double down when they took him after signing Kirk Cousins, and a lot of people shook their heads. It's looking like it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, it really was. I think they've really been validated for that, certainly with what's happened over the last few weeks. And look, we talked about this last week, so I don't want to hammer this too much, but again, Daniels just comes through when it counts. That was a big time performance from Jayden Daniels.
Jayden Daniels to me is doing exactly, he's checking all the boxes that you want to see a rookie quarterback do, which is just immediately change the trajectory of an organization from day one. I mean, that Commanders team and organization has just been like near the bottom of the league for so long. The funny thing is yes, they have, some talent on that roster, but like other than Jayden Daniels, I can't really name anybody impactful that joined the team this year. You know what I mean? So you go from being like a bottom of the league franchise to all of a sudden now a 10+ win team in the playoffs that's winning big games in big moments. It's exactly what you want to see in a potential franchise quarterback.
And it's going to really be the second year in a row that the quarterback taking number 2 really was better quarterback than the quarterback taking number 1.
Agreed.
I don't think there's anyone in the world. And I'm as big a Drake May fan as anyone. I think he's got a tremendous upside. I mean, Jayden Daniels has actually shown it on the field. He's light years ahead of May. He's light years ahead of Caleb Williams. Yeah. He's obvious. I mean, I think Bo Nix is underrated. That was going to be the next thing we're going to talk about. But he's far and away the best player that was taken from the draft last year, and he's showing it just consistently that he has an ability to come through in these close games, which I just think is that's a huge indicator of what he is.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm happy for him. I think it's nice to see the Commanders winning big games.
Yeah,
and, it's what I hope that we could see out of Drake May next year in New England, right?
If we surround him with like anything representative, right, around him.
Exactly.
Honestly, I'll tell you. I mean, one thing I'll say for sure, like Williams to me, and we haven't talked about him in a few weeks, but you saw that game on Thursday night, and I know it was raining out, but like I'll go into next year with major doubts about Caleb Williams. Like to me, he is a distant fourth right now. Like you look at those 4 guys that played, and he has shown the least out of all 4 to me personally.
I mean, I totally agree. I mean, if you think about it, he's got one more win than Drake May, but he's played 6 more games and has a much better roster.
Much better roster. We were in the preseason, I said that Bears team wasn't as good as people said, and that proved to be very true.
Yeah.
But let's also, let's be clear. They're not as bad as they looked either. Like he's got pieces. You give Drake May those pieces, and I'm sorry, you're looking at a 7 or 8 win team in a pretty good quarterback season. The Bears line stinks, but it's probably better than Patriots line.
Yep.
And they've got good weapons.
Exactly. Yeah, totally.
All right, let's talk a little about the other game of the century, which I'm guessing you watched from this weekend, because there were some terrific games. The Falcons-Commanders game was an amazing game. The Bengals-Broncos game on Saturday night, that was one of the best football games I've seen in a long time. Mm-hmm. Absolutely terrific game. Look, my credit to both Burrow and Bo Nix. Bo Nix battled in that game. That guy doesn't get enough credit. Stop calling him Mac Jones. He is not Mac Jones. He's not a guy that's along for the ride. He's a good quarterback.
He is.
He battled that 4th and 1 play. That was a big time play and a great catch by the receiver. It was one of those games, Justin, where neither team really deserved to lose, but someone had to win.
Right. Yeah, totally. That was, for me, obviously I was rooting for the Bengals, but I actually really like this Broncos team and Bo Nix. Like it's kind of tough not to, root for them, especially after everything they went through. I mean, Bo Nix is just, I think he's balling out and showing that he's a competitor, he's tough, and he's talented, and I'm happy for him. So I think the Broncos are whoever gets that 7th seed, whether it's the Broncos or the Bengals, I mean, that's going to be a deserving team. That Broncos team is not going to be an easy out in the playoffs like that. So So you know what? I love seeing it. Joe Burrow in the Bengals. It's unfortunately, I think it's going to be a little too late. I mean, the Chiefs without Mahomes and some of their starters would have to find a way to beat this Broncos team who has everything to play for this coming weekend, right? And so with that being said, I think the season's probably going to end for the Bengals this weekend.
Yeah, and don't forget, Justin, the Bengals also need Miami
to lose too. Right.
So I think it's pretty unlikely that the Bengals are gonna end up in the playoffs at this point.
I agree, but I think what we saw were honestly two of the better quarterbacks in the AFC. I think Joe Burrow, to me, you know how much I love him. I think he's number 2 behind Mahomes. I've said it from day one, and I'll stick with it. I think he had an MVP caliber season this year, and it's just unfortunate that his team kind of disappointed. His defense stunk. They lost some games that they shouldn't have. They had a couple calls go against them, and some big moments. But you know what? I think it was just fun to watch, man. As a fan, like it was a great game.
I mean, there's always an element of chance too to how there's only 17 games. It's not baseball where there's 162 games. You get a couple of bad breaks in a couple of key spots that can swing your season in 2 or 3 games, one way or the other. And I really think the Bengals, that's one of the things here. I mean, they just had some tough breaks and lost a couple games that if a ball bounces differently or, 1 or 2 plays one way or the other, and the Bengals are a 10, 11, 12 win team and they deserve to be in the postseason. All that said, I walk away from that game. I look at how well Joe Burrow played this whole season and certainly on Saturday night. And I'm like, it's hard for me to see Zach Taylor back as the coach of that Bengals team next year. I feel like he is going to probably lose his job as the fall guy based on what happened this year with that team.
I could see that. And I'd be very interested to see, who comes in and replaces him. Because I mean, look, he's taken that team to a Super Bowl. He's taken them to 2 AFC championships. It was a down year for them this year. And I mean, look, I think we've both have kind of said that, like, we didn't think Zach Taylor is necessarily the guy long-term to pair with Joe Burrow. And it's just a matter of when I think you make that break. And I think this might be the year.
The only thing that gives me a little pause to that as I say that take is Marvin Lewis. His mental image of Marvin Lewis crosses my mind there, right? Marvin Lewis was like the man with like walking the cat with 9 lives for like a decade, where we kept thinking they were going to fire him and they did it. And really, I mean, Zach Taylor has had more success than Marvin Lewis. So you're talking about a franchise that is it they're cheap? Is it a philosophy? I don't know, but they don't fire their coaches.
No. They don't. And I actually think he will be back next year, Taylor. I wouldn't be shocked or disappointed if they fired him, but I think he'll be back.
I thought he made a huge mistake on Saturday night that he got away with, which is, putting the game in the hands of the kicker at the end of that game. That was stupid. There was no reason. They run for 8 yards on first down and it's 2nd and 2. And then they kneel on the ball basically a couple times and kick the field goal, which they missed. It was like a 30-something yard field goal. When you're running the ball like that and you have a shaky kicker, why put the game in the hands of the kicker? I thought that was really a big mistake by Taylor.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why at the end of the game, Joe Burrow took matters into his own hands and he said, we're not settling for a field goal. He marched it right down and threw a touchdown. So, yeah, and don't forget too, they're dealing with the backup kicker. McPherson's out.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, it's a backup kicker. So what are you doing? You know that. It's bad coaching.
Yep.
Okay, couple other quick takes and we're gonna wrap it up. I just gotta say, we've talked about this guy before. Baker Mayfield threw 39 touchdown passes this year. That guy's he's having a nice little run down there in Tampa Bay.
He's having a great little run. I mean, he's balling out. He came in there and I think he had a chip on his shoulder, plus, no cares in the world almost. Like he kind of came in there just saying, screw it. I got nothing to lose. I'm coming in and I'm just balling out. And I think that's when he's at his best, when he's able to play like that with that mentality. And he's got some weapons down there too. Plus,
he's got some weapons.
Plus, it's been a kind of crappy division, right? Like he's feasted against his division, right? You know, he's done pretty well against the Falcons, the Panthers, the Saints. So I mean, yeah, it just wound up being a good landing spot for him. And actually, it's funny to think that, you know, you look at the run that Baker Mayfield had these past 2 years, the run that Sam Darnold's having this year, and to think that they were both sitting there in that Carolina roster like 2 years ago.
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It really goes to show you that sometimes it's not the player, it's the organization and what's around them, for sure.
It is. And some players need to mature a little too. These guys are like 21, 22 when they get drafted. I think emotional maturity is a huge part of this, where maybe a guy needs to fail or for a few years. Maybe he's not ready until he's 25, 26, right, 27. And that might be a piece of this too, but you look at the success both these guys have had, and it does speak to, hey, the situation matters.
Yeah, totally.
And one other thing too, just to tie it a little back to New England, when you look at the success they've had with Baker Mayfield and Tampa Bay, and it's like they did an infinitely better job of dealing with losing Tom Brady than the Patriots did. For all these Patriots fans that are just so willing to accept what's happened here the last few years and say, oh, rebuild, what'd you expect? I mean, I hear this all the time. And it's like, look at what Tampa Bay did. Is Tampa Bay 1-15? Like, no, at any point, it is totally possible to rebuild a team without bottoming out for 2 years.
Yeah, exactly. And they were a great example of it. And, yeah, and they even went through some coaching changes. They changed some coaching, their OC, all that stuff. So I mean, like, yeah, they've been able to do it. And but again, starts with having weapons, right? It came down to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and some of those guys. And the
running back. Who's the running back they drafted this year?
The Bucky Irvin kid. He's good. He's been really good.
He's the real deal.
Yeah. So
and Pats are paying Ramondre Stevenson $10 million a year. Was Bucky Irvin a 3rd round pick?
Yeah, something like that.
And who did the Patriots take? The how many chances the Patriots have to take Bucky Irvin? Right. And you know what I mean? Instead, you pay Stevenson a big contract. He's had a disappointing year, fumbles, and you passed on a guy like Irvin. They really could use a good running back. It just to the point. It's like all these little mistakes add up.
They do big time.
All right, Justin. Any other takes you want to go for around the league? Any other teams that catch your eye, or anything else you want to bring up?
I'm just, I guess the one team that I just want to really quick say that the Minnesota Vikings, to me, I'm trying as hard as I can to like shake the stigma of like the Kirk Cousins era Minnesota Vikings, where it was like, it didn't matter how many wins they got, their ceiling was capped and you knew they were going to probably lose in like the first round of the playoffs. Like, this is a different Minnesota team. And there is a very real chance that if the Vikings go in and win on Sunday Night Football this week, that the route to the Super Bowl in the NFC runs through Minnesota,
not Detroit.
Exactly. And this is a different team than we've seen in Minnesota. I don't think they're getting talked about enough. I don't think they'd win a Super Bowl, but I could see them getting there.
Well, it's funny because if you look at the hype around that Detroit team, it's really consistently all year been a team a lot of people talk about. They're consistently mentioned as a Super Bowl contender, a top tier team. Minnesota rarely gets mentioned, I think, in the top tier of the NFL with the Chiefs and the Lions and the Eagles. And yet they have the same amount of wins going into week 18 as Detroit does. And to me, this is a 50-50 game. This game could go either way. Yep. I would be 0% surprised if Minnesota walks out of Detroit with the number 1 seed on Sunday night.
Exactly. They almost beat them the first time they played. So
it was a 2-point game.
2-point game, and Detroit was a lot healthier back then. So yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens, but don't sleep in the Vikings. And I think the last time I checked, I was on FanDuel this morning looking. Plus 800 to win the Super Bowl, not bad odds when you look at some of the odds that are being offered for some of the top flight contenders out there. I mean, Vikings sitting there, the potential number 1 seed, 14-2, and they got the juiciest odds that I could see. So just if you're looking for value, keep the Vikings in mind.
Yeah, and they're talking about a team that's going to have to make a decision this offseason. Don't forget,
Yeah,
Sam
I
Darnold's on a
know.
1 year, $10 million contract, and the Vikings just drafted JJ McCarthy in the first round. To
I
me,
know.
I'm rolling with the guy that I know can do it.
Me
And
too.
if that means McCarthy sits a few years, or even if I have to trade him,
Yep.
that's what I do, because Darnold has really had a terrific season. I think he's had over 30 touchdown passes. He hasn't turned the ball over a ton. I mean, he's been good.
He has. He's been awesome, honestly. And I obviously want to see how he plays in the playoffs, right? When those big games and big moments, does he rise to the occasion? But yeah, the guy has just been awesome this year, and I think he deserves the contract. I think he deserves to be the starting quarterback for that Vikings team moving forward. So
Agreed. One other quick one for you. Only the New York Giants could screw up having the number one pick. Like how do you win that game if you're the Giants? I mean, Drew Lock sucks. He sucked his whole career. Somehow he comes out with the number one pick on the line and looks like Joe Montana.
I know.
And the Giants that can score like 15 points. For the Giants to get to 20 points is like a struggle for the last like 4 years or whatever. And all of a sudden they hang 40 something points against a decent Colts team. You explain that one to me, but that's like being a snake bitten franchise. That's the kind of stuff that happens to you. You win a game when no one expects you to win, and it actually screws you out of the number one pick.
And now they might have to go pay an arm and a leg to get that pick back from New England.
Yeah.
Right. That's the irony of it. Yeah.
so Drew Lock can go slap fives and strut on the sideline like he's Pat Mahomes.
Exactly. And that brings me to kind of one last thing I want to say to take it back to the Patriots. I know we've talked all year and said that we don't want them to tank for the number one pick. We want them to win as many games as possible.
Yep.
For the love of God, please do not go out and win against Buffalo this weekend.
Agreed. How many times have I come on this podcast and said, we need to win, we need to win, we need to win.
Right.
You can't salvage what's happened here the last 6 weeks, losing 6 games in a row. Any of those things that I had hoped to see, the 1993 plan at the end of the season with the strong finish and developing the players and the culture, that's all out the window. That's not changing. No. So you might as well get the number one pick at least.
Exactly.
But I think they're going to win this week because I just think the Bills aren't playing a win, and I just feel like somehow they'll end up with a win and they're going to screw it up. They'll get the 4 pick instead of the 1.
Well, you know what? If that's the case, hopefully we don't pull a Giants. Like maybe we play Jacoby Brissett or
Joe Milton.
Seriously, give Joe Milton a showcase. Yeah, absolutely.
Let him throw a few pick sixes. Like, let's go.
Seriously, yeah. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, but I hope we're here celebrating the potential number one pick, and I just hope we don't pull a Giant. So yeah, please.
I mean, it's a double-edged sword because if you go back and look, like having the number one pick, that's a pretty much a pretty strong statement with a couple notable exceptions. Because I did go back and look at all the teams that had the number one pick this year and what their record was before and then after they got the number one pick. And the team with the number one pick on average improves about 4.5 wins a year, which means if you're a 3-win team, that means you're a 7-win team. So, it just shows you're still two years away, which is not good. But at this point, the die is cast. It is what it is. I'd rather have the number one pick and be able to trade it than just give it away for a meaningless win against the Bills.
Exactly. So yeah, lots.
Did I wear a paper bag over my head Sunday?
Yeah, do it up. I say, you know what? Well, actually, you're gonna go to the game on Sunday.
I'm going to the game. Yeah,
okay, all right. I thought you might sit this one out.
I missed the last one. I haven't missed one in 2 years, but I couldn't go Saturday for reasons completely unrelated to the shitty performance of the team.
Yeah.
I just couldn't go because it was Saturday, and I am going to this game just to go, and I'm going to go and go to the GPH room and eat and take it in, and probably leave in the third quarter when it's basically the 4th preseason game.
Yeah, exactly. Well, all right. Well, this is.
I mean, I will say this. Like, what we didn't even talk about this, but one other Pats thing. What did you think about fans booing Mayo and chanting "Fire Mayo"? I don't obviously have a problem with it, but I thought it seems like some people did.
I don't have a problem with it. I think if anything, hopefully it wakes up Jonathan and Robert up in the owner's box that they're sitting in their own stadiums to a resounding cheer to get rid of their head coach. Like, I hope if they're teetering and they're on the line 50-50, I hope hearing the boos and calls for their coach's head in their own stadium helps tilt them in the right direction.
Well, I think those are the kind of things that any owner would notice, frankly. I mean, that stuff does matter. And you have to look, if you bring this guy back, I mean, what is he coming back to in 2025? He's got a fan base now against him. Mayo has lost this fan base, like by and large. His support has dwindled. I mean, I'd say like 10% of the fans probably want him back at this point. So it's going to be an uphill battle for him. The Patriots have gotten good fan support. I've been to all these games in the context of how bad they've been at home, in particular, the last 3 or 4 years, and certainly the last 2. I mean, this is a team that's won 2 games in the last 2 seasons at home. That building was pretty full on Saturday from the looks of it on television in the first half. By the third quarter, it was empty. And I think that's the kind of thing that you got to look at if you're the Crafts.
Exactly. So we will see. 1 more week left, and I think a lot of interesting stuff a lot of interesting dominoes still to fall in place. Let's put it that way.
We'll be recording next week. If they do can Mayo on Monday, we have to find time on Monday night to record a special Jerod Mayo being fired episode.
Yeah, we could do that for sure.
Of the Dr. Football podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, brother. Well, that's all the time we're going to take. I want to thank everyone that listened to this edition of the Dr. Football podcast. Have a great, safe, healthy, happy New Year. We wish you all prosperity, good fortune in 2025. Enjoy the college football playoffs today, and we will catch you all next week. And who knows if my prediction will be right or not? We will find out in the next couple days. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.